Today. This is session A125-1. And before I turn things over to your presenters, I do want to let you know that we ask that you have all of your video stream turned off in order to save bandwidth. If you look down in your bottom left-hand corner, you can click on where it says stop video if you haven't already. And also throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat so the presenters will be able to see them and answer them at a time that works for them. And now I'm going to turn it over to them. We have Liz, Teal, and Jamila who will be presenting to you today.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, we're so happy to have you guys all on today, talking about a topic that's very near and dear to our hearts. And I wanted to just start by thanking you all because we know that you guys are out there now doing the heroic work of making sure that students are taken care of and fed and learning during this absolutely unprecedented time. So thank you all for your work for our students. We're really excited to be here today to talk to you guys a little bit about accelerating student learning and restarting school. I want to just first preface this with the fact that we do not have all of the answers, of course, but we do have some ideas that we wanted to share with you guys, and we do hope that you will find them helpful. Along the way, we have planned in a few opportunities for everyone to share some ideas on a Padlet and through some polling through the links that were just up on the slide a minute ago and have probably made their way into the chat at this point. So please do pull those up and have them kind of open on whatever device works best for you. And we're going to go ahead and dive in. Before we do that, we wanted to get a little bit of a sense of where everybody on the call is from. So as you are texting in your responses to this question, you'll see everything updating. This is exciting. At the same time, if everybody could also go into the chat and quickly type their role. We'd love to know how many teachers we have, how many leaders we have, how many district leaders we have. So please do throw that into the chat real quick. So great. It looks like we have a lot of teachers on the call. We've got some instructional coaches, master teachers, mentor teachers. We've got folks from Ouachita, St. Charles, Destrehan, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, St. Tammany, a real representation of folks from across the state, which is exciting. All right. Well, this is exciting. This is very helpful to us to know who we are talking to today. And as you guys continue to update this, I'll start telling you guys a little bit about who we are. So TNTP is a national nonprofit. We are based out of New York, but we have a huge team here on the ground in Louisiana of over 20 people. My name is Liz Suarez. I am one of the folks on the ground from TNTP who lives here in Louisiana. I live in New Orleans, but I spend my time supporting parishes across the state. Spend a lot of time on the road in normal times, making my way up to North Louisiana. Spend a lot of time here in New Orleans and around Baton Rouge. And I'm really excited to be here today talking with you guys. I started my career as a teacher, and I have been working with TNTP for about the past 8 years. A little bit about TNTP. We do a variety of work, but most of it centers around 3 areas: talent, academics, and supportive environments. Most of my work is in the academic realm, and most of my work is here in Louisiana. So I'm excited to be here with you all today. I am going to move us forward and let my co-hosts introduce themselves to you as well. I can get slides to advance. 1 second, I might need to stop the share and restart it. And do it one more time. All right, here we go. So Jamila, take it away and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jamila Newman. I am a partner with TNTP, and I've worked for TNTP for about 5 years. I live in Memphis, Tennessee, although to college in Louisiana. Go Northwestern, Natchitoches. Hope you're there for the Christmas festival. And I taught second, third, and fourth grade in Atlanta, and really excited to have an opportunity to talk to you today about learning in particular.
Hey everyone, I'm Teal Holloman. I live in Fayetteville, Arkansas, just as of January. Before that, I've spent 16 years in New Orleans. My teaching career and my work through TNTP is all in the state of Louisiana. I've been with TNTP as a senior effectiveness coach for the past 8 years, and excited to also be on the call with you all today.
Thank you both. And you'll be hearing a lot more from Jamila and Teal as we move forward. But most of all, we really just want to welcome you all here today. It looks like we have a lot of teachers on the call. We really, really appreciate the hard work that you guys have been doing over the past several months to support kids. And we are looking forward to digging into this with you guys today. So as we do that, we'd love to hear just a little bit more about you all. On the Padlet that you had the link for at the beginning that you've all hopefully gotten open now, right now, you'll see there are 2 columns for the questions on this slide, and we'd love for you guys to take the next 3 minutes or so to go ahead and add your thoughts to these 2 questions. First, think about your students' experiences with at-home learning. What has made you the proudest of your district's response to the COVID-19 pandemic? And then again, think about your students' experience with at-home learning over the past couple months. What is keeping you up at night as you think about restarting the school year in the fall? The link to the Padlet too is in the chat if you did not get it before. So hopefully you guys can see the Padlet a little bit as we're looking. For now, just focus on these first 2 questions. We'll spend a little bit more time here. Just want to narrate a few things that I'm seeing. I also have been just blown away by the innovation that I've seen teachers embracing around how to make sure that kids are learning, and how quickly everyone was able to make the shift to reach kids during these very crazy times. In terms of our big rocks, yes, having a lot of trouble getting folks onto the technology for sure, getting kids to engage, meeting kids' needs, etc. And hopefully we can talk through some of these things today and make sure you guys feel good about a path forward. I'm going to pull this PowerPoint back up now. All right. Let's dive in. So what are we doing today? Today, we're going to be discussing a few big questions as you plan to accelerate learning in the 2020-2021 school year using what you learned this spring and what you might be learning this summer to guide you. So there are 3 big questions that we're going to try to answer. First is, how do we create a plan to accelerate student learning? And what do we mean by accelerating student learning? How will we make sure that we're accelerating learning for students in the next 2 years? And what other challenges should we anticipate as we plan to accelerate student learning? Before we go any further, I think it bears mentioning like what we mean when we're talking about accelerating student learning. I think one of the things that we're hearing a lot as we work throughout the state and nationally are just big questions about what we are going to do when kids return this fall, inevitably having had a wide variety of experiences over the past several months, being either at home or being where they are, and like a big dispersion of experiences in terms of getting access to learning during that time. And I think that there's going to be a huge impulse to remediate, as we have in the past, with the idea being that we're going to spend a lot of time on content that kids should have mastered in prior years. And what we know is that approach has not served kids well in the past, and we don't have much reason to believe that it would serve kids well going into the future in this case either. So with that, we're really encouraging everyone to shift their language and shift their mindset a little bit from remediation to acceleration. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means as we go through. Now, you guys all know this. Many of you are teachers, many of you are coaches and principals as well. This is not going to be the only challenge that we face. The academics are just one big piece of the puzzle. We're going to have to be thinking about students' social and emotional learning needs. We're going to need to be thinking about the student and staff health and safety. We're going to need to think about operational decisions and contingency planning and Clorox wipes and making sure everything's clean. We're going to need to be thinking about staffing open positions across our systems, communication with our stakeholders, budgeting. The list goes on and on. And all of these things are incredibly important, but I do want to make sure just to name explicitly now that today we're really going to be talking about the academics. And while all of these things are incredibly important, it is not where we're going to spend our time today. And the reason for that is that we know, and NWEA has been telling us, they're predicting that kids are going to be coming back to us this fall with a lot of unfinished learning. They're predicting that students in mathematics are likely to show much smaller learning gains, returning with less than 50% of the learning gains, and in some grades, nearly a full year behind what we would observe in normal conditions. And preliminary COVID slides estimates suggest students will return in the fall with roughly 70% of the learning gains in reading relative to a typical school year. So we know kids are going to be coming back to us, likely further behind than they normally are. And we're going to have to address that. And one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is the research that we've done over the past couple of years, just about how students who are coming in behind in general fare when they are given access to on-level material and grade level content, strong instruction, deep engagement, and teachers with high expectations for them, how that impacts then their ability to get up to grade level readiness as quickly as possible so that they can be successful. And most of that research for us has been grounded in a report that we wrote called The Opportunity Myth. If you have not had a chance to read this report, I highly recommend it. It was very pertinent over the past couple of years, and I think it is more pertinent now than ever as we really move into the unknown that comes along with our response to COVID-19. So I do encourage you to read it, but we're going to talk about it a little bit right now. So we talked about this just a few minutes ago, but the traditional approach to remediation, which generally is all about providing work that's better suited for earlier grades, won't come close to catching students up and will likely compound a lot of the problems. In our report, The Opportunity Myth, we found that the approach of meeting kids where they are, though well-intentioned, practically guaranteed that they would never get back up to the levels that they needed to be at to be ready for the life that they chose. So this was a report that we wrote in 2018, and I am going to give you kind of the Cliff's Notes of it and the highlights so that we can ground our conversation today about accelerating student learning and what we learned through this report. We wrote it in 2018, and the reason we decided to write about the topic that we did was that we were working at the time with partners across the country to help them make shifts to college and career ready standards that their states had adopted, very, very similar to our standards here in Louisiana. And what we found when we were going in to support that work is that many of the districts that we were working with had professed to have adopted these new standards, but very few of the interactions that we saw in classrooms actually indicated that that shift was being made. So we really only saw that 2/3 or so of the assignments that we were collecting, we saw that only around 2 and 3 classroom assignments were rigorous enough, and only 3 out of 4 teachers were actually making the shift in their classroom instruction. And we were wondering then what the impact that was on students and how students were kind of experiencing this gap that we were noticing in the instruction that we were observing. So we really wanted to get underneath it and see what was happening with kids. And we found 5 big things. first, and just to give you a little bit of a sense of what we did, we observed over 2,700 classrooms. We saw, we looked at the way that we looked at teaching, we looked at student work. We thought about how students were responding to that work, how they were engaging with it. We gave them surveys to understand how they were experiencing their classes. We talked to them and their families. We talked to the teachers. We basically came at the study from every angle that you could to really get a full understanding of what was happening in schools and classrooms and districts across the country. We had 5 big partners for it. It was a combination of traditional districts, CMOs, and there was a rural district as well. And what we found overall was that first, students had really big, clear plans for college and career. When we asked them what they wanted to do, most of them knew what they wanted to do, and they were doing what they thought that they needed to do to be successful for the most part. With that though, even though they were doing what they were asked to do in school, most of them still were not ready to succeed after school. And within that, what we found is that most students were receiving A's, B's, and C's on their classwork. And they were believing that if they were earning those types of grades, they were ready to go. But when they graduated, it was very clear that they were actually not prepared to be successful either in college or career. The third big thing that we found is that students spend most of the time in school without access to 4 key resources. And we're going to talk about these a lot, probably throughout the rest of the day. But those 4 key resources were grade appropriate assignments, strong instruction, deep engagement, and teachers with high expectations for them. We also found that students of color and those from low-income communities, English language learners, and students with mild to moderate disabilities had even less access to the 4 key resources than their more affluent peers, or their peers in general. And then the final thing that we found is that greater access to the 4 key resources can and does improve student achievement, particularly for students who start the year behind. And this is one where I really want to double down today, because while we never in our wildest dreams imagined that we'd be up against COVID-19, I think that our findings become more important now than ever to reflect on as we try to figure out how to ensure that kids are getting what they need when they return to us in whatever format that is. So the opportunity myth, therefore, is the false promise that if students do what they're asked to do in school, they'll be set up for success. And if they don't succeed, it must have been they that have done something to blow their chance. And it's on all of us, not just teachers, to give students a better school experience that will set them up for success. And we can choose to upend the opportunity myth. And this is, again, I think it's really important for us to have a very common vocabulary when we're talking about this, because opportunity gaps that currently exist in our system are created by adults. Kids, for the most part, in large part, are coming to school and doing what they're asked to do. And they believe us when we say that if you come to school and do what you need to do what we ask you to do, that you'll be prepared for whatever you want to do when you come back. And it's on us to make sure that we're delivering on that promise. And currently we are not. And now with the current reality of having schools being closed for so long, it becomes even more important for us to breathe life into that promise. And so let's talk a little bit more about what these 4 key resources actually are. So grade appropriate assignments. What we're talking about here is making sure that students are just getting consistent opportunities to work with stuff that's appropriate for their grade level. Does that mean that they will never have opportunities to work on stuff that is not their grade level? No, but it means that most of the time they should be getting opportunities to work on grade appropriate assignments. And what we found in our study is that the amount of time that kids were actually spending on grade appropriate assignments was incredibly small. Now, here in Louisiana, we've done a lot of work, obviously, to combat that. Most of us at this point are implementing Tier 1 curricula, and if we are using them, then we are giving our kids access to assignments that are appropriate for their grade level. What needs to be top of mind and paramount is that that doesn't stop because we are not in a physical school building or because we've had extended school closures. Kids really need the opportunity to grapple with content that's appropriate for their grade level and have opportunities to do the thinking that goes along with that type of work, which really brings us to the next key resource, which is strong instruction. And we define that as instruction that puts the majority of the thinking onto the students. So I'm sure all of you guys can imagine, I know that myself, when I was in the classroom, this is not something I did very well. I was a teacher that stood at the board and tried to show kids explicitly how to do things. And so even though I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, there was a lot of me writing answers on the board and having kids kind of copy them. And what we're trying to shift here is to give kids experiences where they have to grapple, productively struggle, and think in order to come to their own understanding. And this is good. This is hard in a brick and mortar classroom. It is even harder when you have to think about how to create those experiences, either in a virtual setting or a hybrid setting, or even in a setting where we've got, 10 kids in a classroom and they're coming in shifts. But this is going to be critical that we begin to figure it out. Deep engagement is another one that's incredibly important. And what we found is that kids, for the most part, in a lot of classrooms across the country that we studied, just were not engaged in the work that they were doing, either because it was not interesting or because it was too easy. The year that we were doing the study was the year that Beyonce's Lemonade came out. And when we were giving surveys, you would be shocked to see how many kids were thinking about Beyonce when they were actually doing their work. So they were doing what they were being asked to do, but they were thinking about Beyonce. And I can tell you that that is something that resonated with me because I had a lot of experiences like that in classrooms, both as a teacher and a student. And that's something that we need to get past, both in normal times and even more importantly now. How are we going to keep kids engaged in learning? I think I saw this on the Padlet from several of you when we are not in a traditional setting at all. And then finally, teachers who hold high expectations for their students and believe that they can and will meet the demands of grade level standards. Sadly, we found that a lot of teachers had a lot of reservations about whether or not their kids could be successful with the standards. And what we know is that that translates, whether or not we say it out loud to our kids. If we believe it, it comes through in other ways. And this is something that we need to be very cognizant of, particularly now as we're going into a very unfamiliar setting. And the reason I wanted to define those clearly is because the 4 resources make a huge difference. When students get access to them, their outcomes improve. And that's true for all students in our sample. You can see that there were 1.7 more months of academic progress when they had access to better assignments, 0.2 more months of academic progress when they had access to stronger instruction, 2.5 more months of academic progress when they were reported being more engaged in class, and 4.6 more months of academic progress when their teachers had higher expectations for them. But it was even more true for our kids who started the year below grade level. You can see how staggering the improvement was when kids got more access to each of these resources when they came in behind. And I really want to double down here, because if our hypothesis is that kids are going to be coming back to us with more unfinished learning, then this is data that we cannot ignore. It's going to be our job going into next year to make sure that we are not spending large swaths of time digging back into content that they should have covered last year, or spending 6 weeks of our school year doing full remediation of standards that are not appropriate for the grade level. Because what we know through this research is that that does not serve them. It keeps them behind and never gives them sufficient opportunity to come to accelerate. So now we're gonna switch gears no, we're not yet. These commitments are very important. So the commitments that we asked everyone to make when we published this report, I think become significantly more important now. The first commitment that we asked is that every student should have access to the 4 key resources, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or any other part of their identity. And we'll continue to investigate the extent to which our students receive access and report on progress. And we are also doubling down on the idea that every student and family is an authentic partner and should have real opportunities to shape the experiences students have in school, receive accurate and accessible information about their child's progress, and have a legitimate role in decision-making. We will continually seek feedback from all students and families about whether we're living up to this commitment. If these were important before, they are 100,000 times more important now, when we need to make sure we understand exactly what's happening with each student, whether that's just understanding their daily lives during these unprecedented times, understanding their ability to access technology, or understanding the types of trauma that they may have experienced while they were away from the building or while they're in the building. In order to really accelerate learning without doing these 2 things, we're already going to be starting behind. And with that framing in mind, we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit about what it means to actually accelerate student learning. Before we do, we have one more poll that we'd like you guys to participate in. So hopefully you've still got menti.com up or near you. There's a different code to enter. But what I'd like for you guys to do is go ahead and get onto that code and answer this question. Reflect on your experience with spring distance learning, and were students given access to the 4 key resources during their time away from the building? Again, just because I do not expect that you guys remember all of them, I will say them again. It is access to grade appropriate assignments, strong instruction that puts thinking onto the kids, deep engagement, and teachers who have high expectations. So far, our responses are very much in alignment with what I have been hearing and seeing from our partners across the state. A lot of somewhats, a few yeses, and a few nos. So before I pass it over to my colleague, Jamila, to talk us a little bit about how we can actually accelerate student learning, I do just want to anchor us in the 4 key resources as we move forward and your responses to this question. Obviously, the goal going forward is to make sure that kids are getting access to the 4 key resources, regardless of the format that we go back to school in the fall. And so that's something that we need to be keeping at the forefront of our mind, is like, how do we do it? Because it's not necessarily going to be as straightforward as it may have been in the past, not that it ever was. And so keep this front and center as we go forward. What can this look like, and how are you committing to making sure that kids are getting more access to opportunity? And with that, I am going to pass it over to Jamila. Jamila, do you want me to advance the slides for you, or would you like me to stop the share and hand it over?
You're fine with advancing for me if it's faster. So thank you all again for inviting us in to talk a little bit about accelerating student learning. Over the next few slides, we'll dive more deeply into what accelerated learning looks like, and as well as sharing a few case studies. But I just want to ground us back in something that Liz shared a little bit earlier. We're talking about accelerated learning because on the forefront of everyone's mind is imagining kind of the learning loss that we might see from our students. We saw the graphics earlier from the NWEA research about 30 to 50% loss in math and reading. And traditionally in our educational system, when we've handled learning loss, we've done one of two things. We've either retained students, held them back a year because of concern that they've had too much learning loss that moving them ahead wouldn't be successful, or we've remediated. And in most cases, when we talk about remediation, we talk about reteaching prior skills. And often this type of remediation is done where it's focused on drilling into isolated skills that quite often don't have anything to do with the current curriculum that students might be receiving in their grade level core instruction. And when we've looked at these two approaches to supporting learning loss, retaining students, and remediation, research time and time again tells us that that is not a successful approach. What is more successful is the concept or the idea of accelerating learning loss. And really, we're going to talk about what that actually means now. Ready? So when we talk about accelerating learning loss, our first priority is really thinking critically about grade level content. Accelerating learning does not mean that you are not addressing gaps in prior years' knowledge or content areas, but instead what it means is that you're using those gaps to inform current instruction. So I'm looking at my grade level content and my grade level material, and I'm saying, in order for students, if I'm teaching a seventh grade class, for example, and I'm saying, in order for my seventh graders to be successful in this seventh grade classroom, what learning loss might I need to address, or what learning gaps might I need to address from previous years so that they're able to really engage in this seventh grade content successfully? That means I'm not trying to select or go through a whole host of standards all the way back from ot5, like kindergarten forward. I'm only looking for those standards that are most applicable, standard skills or knowledge that are most applicable to my grade level content. And those are the things that I'm really focused on. So grade level content is the first priority, meaning that that's what really centers our thinking about accelerated learning. The other thing that's really important is that you address inequities head on. When accelerating learning, we are particularly trying to get at this idea of equity for students. And one of the things that we think is a great equalizer is giving all students access to high quality materials, high quality content, and grade level content. But that also means that there are going to be students in your classroom who have gaps and have unfinished learning. And we're not simply going to say they need to do something lower on their level, something that they feel like they can do more independently. It means that we have to address those inequities by providing effective scaffolding techniques that allow them to have the access necessary to the content that they need to receive in their grade level. We also think it's important that system leaders assume the best of all of our stakeholders. Even if in the fall we go back to our brick and mortar buildings and everything is open, our country and our citizens and our community members are not going to be the same. And so during this time, while we're focused on instruction and focused on getting students back into high quality work, we also need to recognize that we need to take care of both the students and the adults in our building. And we need to provide systems that really support and uphold the cultures that we've worked so hard to achieve within our communities around our education systems. And with that in mind, it's important throughout this entire process that we're simplifying our communication, that we're doing it frequently, that we're getting it all out to all of our important stakeholders, and that we're communicating clearly about our needs and expectations for instruction during this time. So what the accelerated learning guide that we've posted on our external materials and our website really speaks to how a system, a district might approach developing an accelerated learning plan. Over the next few weeks, we'll be putting out some things that are much more suited for principals as well as for teachers about accelerated learning. But just to give you an idea of what this might look like, we first encourage folks to assemble a small but diverse accelerated planning team that will engage in a series of planning sessions around what accelerated learning in your specific system can look like or will look like and what you will focus on. I want to just highlight the word diverse here because we think it's really important to have cross-functional teams here, pulling folks from your special education department, pulling people from your multilingual English language development department, pulling folks from your AP programs or your IB programs, whatever it might be. So it should, and pulling people vertically across grade levels. So having someone from kinder, from elementary, middle, and high school on your accelerated plans. Plan for several delivery scenarios, instructional delivery scenarios. So when thinking about and preparing for next year, while we all hope that we are in class in front of our students, in front of the students that we anticipate or that are on our rosters, we might have a multitude of scenarios that we have to play out. And so as you're thinking about your accelerated learning plans, you want to think about them within the context of being in person, as well as in the context of being as students receiving instruction at home be both asynchronously or synchronously or guided by a parent or guardian. As I said, you'll also kind of assemble an advisory team that this can be a group of stakeholders that are just advising and sharing feedback on some of the choices that your accelerated team is making. You're going to concretely plan for accelerating student learning across the course of the next year or more. And we'll talk about what that can look like in just a few seconds. And then you'll want to have a series of kind of key questions that you'll need to begin planning and answering for reopening. This can be, specifically here, we're talking about academics. So it might be, what materials are we going to use? When are we going to use those materials? What are our expectations for data collection? How long will students be in various aspects of their instructional practice? All of those are important questions that you need to ask and kind of generate at the beginning of your planning process. But we encourage that you don't wait to have all of your questions answered. I know I am a type A person. I have some obsessive compulsive things that I'm working through with my mother. And I like to have all the answers, have everything highlighted and color coded. But we really encourage you to start this process and start this planning process even before you may have all of the answers that you need. And then I think we talk about collecting additional information because really to operate in this mindset and prepare effectively for next year and even prepare effectively for accelerated learning, you're going to have the principles of change management and the principles of continuous improvement at the core of your practice. So you're going to want to go on, consistently collect information and inputs and outputs from your system to really understand what's working, and so that you have the ability to effectively course correct. I know that there have been a ton of challenges that have arose out of COVID, but we've also seen some real opportunities and wins. And so it's important that even now you're using some of the experiences, the anecdotes, the qualitative and quantitative information from the spring experience to really think about what needs to be addressed, what needs to be really propelled or scaled to a larger level, as well as things that you really want to go after next year as you think about accelerated learning or think about reopening. In our guide, we kind of shared a way to think about your planning process just to get you in a frame where this doesn't have to happen overnight. You can kind of pace this out until the beginning of the school year. Right now, it might be about really getting your team set up to figure out who is going to be really focused on the academic or instructional aspects of your system or your school site. And then starting to kind of prioritize your content, figuring out what's the most important things for you to try to recover or in terms of unfinished learning, what will have the biggest impact on the work of the current year. 1 month out, 1 to 2 months out, you'll want to start updating your scope and sequences and training your teachers and leaders. Effectively accelerating learning is not just about reshuffling the deck of standards cards in your scope and sequence and saying, okay, we're done. It really is about preparing your leaders and your teachers for the type of strong instruction that Liz mentioned and what that really looks like and how to engage in that. And it is, in some ways, even rethinking your instructional program. So in order to do that effectively, you have to prioritize communication and training to make sure that your teachers, leaders, your teachers, school leaders, and even your parents are ready to make that shift. Liz is going to walk us through just a case study of how this looked in a school in Louisiana.
Yep. So we wanted to just give you, I know a lot of times you hear a lot of this advice and it feels very overwhelming. So I did want to just provide an opportunity to think about how one parish in Louisiana is approaching this right now. And not to say that it's perfect. Everybody is going through this learning process together, but I did think it could spark some ideas. And of course, if you have any questions as we go through, do feel free to put them in the chat. We are we'll be happy to try to answer them for you. So Richland Parish is in Northeast Louisiana. It's very rural, and they are a partner of ours. And when schools closed in March, I think that they struggled and scrambled just like the rest of us did to figure out what to do. And they were able to pull together some resources and get some continuous learning happening for kids, but they recognized the limitations of the approach just because I think for a lot of us, like what has happened over the past 3 months has been what I am referring to as emergency school. It's just been a response to the cards that we got dealt that we were not expecting. And Richland was very much in that boat as well. And now I think that the school year has wrapped up, their eyes are looking towards next fall, and they're thinking, no matter the circumstance, right? No matter if we're still, if we can't predict exactly what things will look like, we need to be able to transition and adapt from emergency school to school in whatever format next year is going to take. But they know that there are a lot of unknowns still, and a lot that we just don't know how to do yet. And so what they are doing is they're really taking some opportunities this summer to practice some things, try them out, and see what they can learn in order to have a really clear perspective as they go into the fall of next year. So this summer, so like if you kind of think about this timeline that Jamila just showed everybody, Richland Parish, we're still very much within this whole getting our team set up and prioritizing our content. But the way that they have approached doing so is through their summer academy. So they're going to do a virtual summer school, and the goals of it are going to be as follows: that students will be prepared socially, emotionally, and academically to make a strong start in the upcoming school year, that teachers will be supported by instructional coaches to discover best practices while teaching and collaborating in a virtual setting, while receiving training on distance learning protocols and methods, and school leaders will use key ideas learned from this practice to develop a virtual learning contingency plan for the 2020-2021 school year. So the idea is that they're going to use summer as a training ground, both for themselves and for their students, to figure out what this is going to look like going into next year, so that they can ensure their kids are getting more access to the 4 key resources, no matter the way that school starts. And the way that they're going to do that is they're going to be running summer school Monday through Thursday each week. The kids are going to have assignments until Friday. And without getting into the details of this, the key thing is that they are going to keep many of the same structures that they would in an in-person setting, and continue to try to maximize the effectiveness of them. So they're still going to have PLCs every week, where they're going to come together and talk about the work that students are generating from their virtual or distant classrooms, because they have to have high tech and low tech options, as most of you guys will as well, just because not all kids have internet access. They're going to have instructional leadership team meetings once a week, where the express purpose will be to talk about what happened that week and think about what they learned from it, so they can apply it to their strong start plans. That'll happen on Thursdays. So principals are cued into this, as well as instructional coaches and the teachers. And the commitment that the teachers are making who are working on this summer is to try a bunch of things out, and then be part of the process to figure out what worked and what didn't work. And then help all the rest of the teachers come fall figure out how we are going to incorporate this into a meaningful plan for next year. So when we were talking about who our task forces are, who's in the room making the decisions, as often as we can, we want to be making those decisions from a place of trying something and seeing if it worked. I think a lot of us have experienced thus far, particularly at the teacher level, that it's really hard to get kids to complete our assignments. It's really hard to figure out how to take guidebooks lessons and turn them into virtual lessons or a packet. And we're not going to be able to figure those things out unless we are trying things differently. We're going to have to get super innovative. We're going to have to try different things. And if we're not willing to do that, then we're not going to have the opportunities to learn. So it's like, we can't just be thinking outside of the box. It's almost like we got to go find another box and then think through that box to the next box, and be documenting what we learn from it. So the way too that they are approaching the content for this is they're not going to double down on the idea of synchronous learning. I think that there are still a lot of barriers that make that really challenging, but what they are going to do is be really intentional about the times of day where teachers do go live in some form or fashion with kids. They're going to explore using technology like GoFormative, Nearpod, Flipgrid. They are going to teach the tier 1 curriculum. So they're going to be using, they always use the guidebooks and Eureka, and they are going to use that as well. And a big part of what they're working on right now before summer school starts next week is identifying which lessons they're going to, or which units they're going to teach, and how to whittle those lessons down and those units down so that kids still get the key learning that they need from the units without doing every slide, because we just know that that's not realistic. So this is what they are attempting to do this summer. And all of that's going to be in service of developing a plan that will hopefully work. So in June, they're going to be having the Summer Academy. In July, instructional leadership teams are going to take all of the reflections from summer school, which will end on July 2nd, and incorporate those into a set of recommendations for how school will actually function next year and what we have learned about the best ways to engage kids in non-traditional ways. And then finally, in August, everyone who's been a part of the work this summer is going to commit to making sure that they're part of the team who's training the rest of the teachers in the district. And the hypothesis then is that they will be much better prepared for a strong start in 2020 or this fall, in whatever format school comes back in. And a big part of that work that they're going to do in July is based off of this document that I have linked here for you guys via bit.ly. Ashley, I think we'll go ahead and put that in the chat for us so you can take a look at it. But really what you'll see when you open it up is that leadership teams and teachers are going to be tasked with thinking about how they defined themselves before COVID, what that then looked like during COVID, and what they need to think about in order to be prepared for whatever comes next. And then they're really going to be pushed to get very, very deep in terms of what each of these things needs to look like in an in-person return, a hybrid return, or in a distance learning setting, and who's the owner of it. And I share this with you because I think one of the things that I'm hearing a lot right now is a lot of very high level stuff about like, well, we're going to have to plan for platooning, but we don't really know what that means. And we're not sure how to get into the weeds with it. So we're just going to avoid it for a little bit longer. We're going to wait and we're going to see what happens. Or I'm a teacher and my administration hasn't told us, so I'm not going to get too heavy into the thinking on that yet. My recommendation would be, if you can begin to think about it, do begin to think about it, because it's really, really hard. And I think what we're learning through the work in Richland Parish, for example, is that giving access to the 4 key resources will only work with super intentional planning and making sure that we're actually thinking about the details of what each of these things looks like. So I'm going to give you guys just a couple of minutes to open this up and take a look at it if you'd like. Please do post any questions that you have in the chat. I'll do my best to answer them. And then we can move forward with talking about what some of the what all of this can look like in other ways as well. I cannot see the chat for some reason anymore. So if there are questions, Ashley or Teal, if you could let me know what they are, that would be helpful. Once you have taken a look at this, and this can be reflections about this document or any of it, do go and there is a spot on the Padlet for you guys to go ahead and post your reflections. So if you still have that open, please do go ahead and jot your notes down on the Padlet. All right, so we're seeing a couple of really great reflections here. Yes, so access is a huge one. I can tell you that what I have heard folks thinking about doing is making sure that anything that kids need, like novels, etc., are sent home. And that whatever you're creating for a virtual classroom needs to be created for in a paper way as well. And we need to think through different ways to get those materials home to kids so that if they don't have access to the internet, they're still able to participate in the work. But it will take a lot of flexible thinking for sure. I know that a lot of schools are also thinking about different ways to staff buildings to help with some of that. So potentially, depending on how many kids you have who don't have access versus those who do, instead of having 2 sections of 7th grade math, there might be a 7th grade math that's virtual and a 7th grade math that is low tech. So a lot of different ways to think about it. I'm not sure I know what the answer is, but it's certainly something to be thinking about. Yeah, engagement is another thing that I've seen come up again and again. This one's really tough, but some of the things that we've been talking about with our partners across the country, as well as like the intentionality around making sure that parents understand what's happening, has to be so much more strategic in the world, in this type of a world. I don't know how many of you guys are parents, but I am a parent. So I was living this both from educators as well as the mom side. And I can tell you that when things got sent home that felt to me like busy work, because I was also working, they were the things that didn't get done, like that just did not get done. And sometimes it really wasn't busy work. I just didn't understand it. So one of the things that I've done really well.
Not yet.
One of the things that I have seen done really well is when teachers are sending home newsletters or some other format where goals for the week are expressly written out so that parents understand them, and where there's something that's done as part of the setup process for this, where parents are engaged in the conversation with the teacher to understand what the expectations are and why kids are being asked to do what they do. So for example, just to stick with the Richland theme for a minute, for their summer school, they're going to do a diagnostic week next week where the teachers are going to get in touch with each kid individually who's participating and their parent to show them, to talk to them about what the experience will be, ask them how they're doing, meet some of their social emotional learning needs, and then do their diagnostic assessment with them so that they can actually hear what the kids are thinking about, but then also spend about 5 or 10 minutes just talking to the parents about like, what's Nearpod? What's Flipgrid? What are the technological platforms you're going to have to access? And a lot of that will go a long way, I think, with getting some kids to participate who may not be, simply because they don't know how to access it. So that's a lot, and there's a lot more that we could talk about, but I am going to pass it back over to Jamila to move us forward.
So Liz was just talking about engaging with families, and we wanted to just highlight a few things that we think are really important as you do that. So first, just making sure that throughout the year, not just kind of going into reopening or even at the end of the school year, assessing and helping to get an understanding of your family's basic needs. So have students and families' basic needs been met? Like, are they having challenges with food or housing or childcare or loss of job or loss of income? Because all of those things can play into a family's ability to remain connected and engage in what's happening academically. And so if you're able to get in front of that and support families in whatever way you can, having that knowledge on the forefront is really important. In terms of student learning, really assessing and understanding, have students and their families had the resources and support they needed to continue learning? So did they have the novels, as Liz may have mentioned, at home, the decodables for our K through 2 students? Did they have the technology and the guidance for how to use the technology that they needed to be able to engage in both in-person or at-home learning? Connectedness. So we're really wanting to make sure that you have a sense of how often have families and students been communicated with, how connected have they remained, how knowledgeable are they about the goings on within the system or the decisions that are being made, how are they feeling about their connection with teachers, their connection with administrators, et cetera. Just to make sure that families, and I think sometimes we often prioritize our most at-risk students, but I've had several of my colleagues and friends be like, I haven't heard from anybody, and they are not typically seen as students or families that may be at risk. So during this time, it's important that we're really trying to reach out and connect with all parents not just parents that we're most concerned about or families that we're most concerned about. Communication and expectations. So again, you're wanting to assess for families and for students if they feel like the information that's been coming from the school has been clear. We've had a lot of systems across the country who have given surveys, either surveys that they already had originally planned, they've just added to them, or they've given unique kind of COVID response surveys to really understand how are people receiving the information. Is it frequent enough? Is it clear enough? Are the venues that they have access to in terms of communication effective? If it's texting, streaming something on the news, et cetera, just to make sure that they have the information that they need, because a lot of districts are really preparing for if next year we reopen and then have to have an immediate closure, you need to be able to get new information out to people as quickly as possible and be able to kind of reshift your system within 24 to 48 hours. Whereas this spring, we kind of got like 2 or 3 weeks in some cases before things got up and running. Because you'll be really live and in school, the expectation is that you'll need to be able to move much more nimbly and quickly. So understanding how communication is being received is going to be important. And then for future planning, just making sure that families and students feel as if their voice is being heard, as well as staff feel as if their voice is being heard in how you approach planning. That being said, we know that lots of systems are dealing with a lot of constraints that are outside of their control. And so some of the things that we felt like systems have done really well is if they're not at a place yet where they can roll out their full plan, they've gone ahead and rolled out, here are some of the things that we're considering for next year. Here are some non-negotiables that we'll have to put in place, either based on health and safety policies or governmental policies. Here are some things that we can try and things that we won't be able to try, and just getting that information out there early on so that families and staff and students are already aware of that. And then also finding ways to engage with family members, staff members and students as you find the planning, but doing some level setting on the front end of what people can expect and how people can engage, and how you'll be using the information and the feedback that they share to plan for the future. So as we think, we're just going to do like a quick jot in the Padlet about like which of these systems have you already planned to implement in your own district, either surveying, communicating with families, scheduling your time, which feels like completely new as you're reflecting on some of the things that we've discussed today. And what will you need to do now to ensure that you have structures in place across the district to accelerate student learning, starting on day one of reopening? So we'll just take a few minutes to jot your thinking in the Padlet. That's such a key point. One of our colleagues just shared that we know some kind of conversation is happening, but so many people, because things are in such a state of flux, may feel reluctant to share. And so that's really why we are encouraging systems to feel okay with, even if you don't have a plan. I live in Tennessee, for example, and the local school district here has said, hey, we've pulled, like, let people know kind of what's happening in the background. So we've pulled together, they've mentioned on the, they've shared in their briefings, like we've pulled together a task force. Here are the folks on the task force. We'll be sending out surveys and doing all calls to get further feedback on these dates. We'll have a final decision by this date. And they've already started talking a little bit about some of the things that they're considering in terms of reopening. So extending the school day for some schools or some students, having Saturday school or some tutoring. So it is, I think, even if it's not a firm plan, if you are a system leader on the call today, thinking about how you can at least share where you are in your planning process so that folks don't feel like it's a vacuum or just have as much information as they're possible. So I'm doing that for all the type A's out there like myself who just want to know something, even if it's not a plan. Oh, and I love that some people have already talked about drafting surveys to get information from parents and families. And then people have really been prioritizing ensuring one-to-one technology options, both technology as well as broadband in preparation for next year. Great. So let's actually dive a little bit more into how we actually accelerate learning in the next 2 years. So as we shared, you are going to be prioritizing the most critical prerequisite skills and knowledge for each subject area or grade level now. I think it's really important that I highlight that the acceleration model is not about ignoring or revisiting or not revisiting previous skills. It simply means that we revisit those skills. The skills that we revisit from previous years or prior grades are laser selected. It is a strategic selection of what you're going back to revisit. And it's a real clear focus of being applied in the right way. So if you are doing accelerated learning, you are going back to recapture content from previous grades, but it has to be immediately applicable to what students are going to be learning currently in their grade level. And it has to be applied in really sound and strategic ways. And we'll talk about what that can look like in just a second. You'll also want to really prioritize your approach to diagnostics or diagnosing students' unfinished learning. Now, I know that states and systems may have their own set of priorities in how to assess students once they return to school next year. But it may be important at the school or teacher level to also diagnose students to really understand what your instructional practice or intervention will need to look like to support unfinished learning and to accelerate learning. Again, when you are thinking about the diagnostic, you are not going to present students with a dissertation of every single standard that they may have missed in the previous year. You might only diagnose students and maybe just even a small pre-test before they're starting a unit of study, or it could be something that's more comprehensive. But you only really need to diagnose students on those prerequisite skills that you've already identified are going to be the most important skills for you to recover given the content that you're covering in the current year. And then, as I shared before, you want to make sure that everyone is on the same page of how you're adapting your scope and sequence or pacing guides to really reflect what you're anticipating students may need to recover or what you see from their data, from their diagnostic data or any other standardized test data that you may have. And again, we've said train our teachers and leaders on your expectations and process and what this will look like, and then monitor your students' progress ongoing. So let's actually give a quick example of what this might look like with a book from your guidebook, Out of the Dust. If folks remember and know this text, it is from a period of time that's really focused. It's for 6th grade students where they have to kind of know some historic knowledge and may need to know some background knowledge to really be able to engage in this text effectively. Now, as a teacher or educator, we know that one of the core strategies that we can use to help students access complex text is building their content knowledge, building their background knowledge, especially when we have a period text that may be from a different time period or place. So as an entire class, there might be content-rich nonfiction that might help access or bridge the literary content that students would get in this text to help them understand about FDR's New Deal, the Dust Bowl, et cetera. So you might pull them out of the anchor text, pull them out of this text, and have them read some other nonfiction about the New Deal, some nonfiction text to understand what the Dust Bowl meant, to understand and gain context for the depression. That might be something that you do with your entire class, or to accelerate learning for students that you are particularly concerned about who may have unfinished learning from the previous year. This might be work that you do with them 2 or 3 days prior to doing this work with the larger class as a part of their core content. So what I might say is, I've got a group of 8 to 10 students that have some unfinished or lack some proficiency in reading or reading comprehension. And I want to give them more time with this content before it's delivered in class. So I could either take those 8 to 10 students and preview Out of the Dust with them. So I might begin reading the text with them in advance and asking them questions, getting them used to the vocabulary, the cadence of the text, the characters, the setting, etc. I might read one of these nonfiction excerpts about some of the topics that they're covered early on with students in advance of them reading it with their peers, to prepare students for some of the linguistic challenges that they might encounter when they get into that core content. I'm helping with unfinished learning. I'm addressing gaps that students might have, but it's just in time. I'm doing it within the context of what students will experience as a part of their core content. So that could be about helping with vocabulary, helping with topics, helping even just with fluency, and acting as that first read with students. So rather than them doing their first read with their peers 2 or 3 days from now, I might just have them do that first read with myself. So I'm getting them used to that fluency practice. That's an example of accelerated learning that you could do with your whole class, or you could do with just a subset of students who need that additional support and help. Math is a little bit different and a little bit unique in that one of the things that we're anticipating as people think about next year, the way that the standards are characterized or labeled can often send the false message when we think about supporting lost learning, that some standards are not as important as other standards in the sense of I don't even have to think about them. So early on when we were talking to systems about addressing learning loss, we heard systems say, well, next year, what we could do is rather than doing all of the standards in the grade level, we'll just focus on the standards that focus on major work of the grade, and we'll remove any units that are on those additional standards, which would then give us room to repeat any units from the prior grade. We do not encourage this. We do not think it's right to remove any additional standards units, because you'll then just run into the rat race of year after year you're trying to play catch up with students. While the major work of the grade is important, these are not the only standards that students need to achieve or receive. So even some of the additional standards from the prior grade become more important than the major standards from the prior grade because of how they're applied in the current grade level for students. So it's important that you use tools like the coherence maps that can be found on Achieve the Core, or other tools to really understand how the standards fit together and what prerequisite skills are necessary. But that you don't just go through the natural thing of we'll cut out all, we'll only do major work of the grade, we'll cut out any additional standards. So a lot of folks, I just want to spend a little bit more time on this idea of diagnostics because people have had a lot of questions about it. If you are using high quality materials, we really encourage you first and foremost, rather than trying to go out and search for another tool or another resource to use, that you simply use the diagnostics that are a part of your materials as much as possible, because those are going to be really great in helping you inform like the instruction that you're doing, which is the big goal of diagnostics, being able to apply it to the lessons that you're immediately supporting students with. Again, that to save time, and also because we don't want children coming back on their first day back at school, spending all day and all night doing diagnostics, you might only just want to plan to diagnose only the prioritized knowledge and skills. And as I said, you might even break up your diagnostics over time. So it might be just for this unit, here are the things that I want to cover with students. Let me see where their learning is, so that you don't have to have these 2-3 day long diagnostic experiences or week-long diagnostics experiences. To that end, we plan to just to spend no more than a few hours administering a diagnostic to an individual student. And then think through the data that you collect during home learning, if it's still going on. So if you're still doing any at-home learning with students, have expectations for at-home learning, or if you're doing something for summer school, really think about what data that you're collecting and how that might inform your instructional practice next year. And then, as we said, as you're thinking about building your calendar to help students reach the demands of a grade level, you might consider doing things like extending the school day, extending the school year, offering tutoring, changing your schedule to give 45 minutes of intervention that can be used for accelerated learning time. Any of those things just to help with the demands if that allows. Also, I don't want people to think that you have to be overly reliant on diagnostics. Many of us have been teaching for years, since Methuselah walked the earth, and we have a good instinct for where students might have unfinished learning. So you can use this time right now before you do diagnostics to begin predicting the type of unfinished learning that students might have, the types of gaps they may have, and looking at your standards in the upcoming year to determine what unfinished learning you need to prioritize. It's also going to be really important that you set expectations for teachers in terms of the provided curricular materials, especially if they're going to have to go back to recapture unfinished learning from the previous grade. Clarify for them what materials they can and should use to do that type of learning, and or help them by providing materials in advance to support that acquisition of prior year content. So again, just quickly, this section of your planning might start to feel a little like getting ready for a normal school year, if there's such a thing. And as you're going to ensure that your academic and professional learning teams have solid plans to train your teachers and leaders to understand and execute your acceleration plan. To do this, you'll really want to leverage the professional learning time you have preparing your teachers to return to school. Of course, the acceleration plan will not be the only thing teachers need to support around. You'll likely provide support around social emotional learning strategies, potential training for at-home learning, should it need to occur, and public health training. But in addition to all of that, we think it's really important that you ensure that you have a solid plan in place for supporting teachers and leaders to accelerate rather than remediate student learning. And knowing that this approach might be brand new to folks, it's important that you really share the rationale and background behind this and what it can look like in real time. We've given you a few high-level examples of what this can look like, as well as like some training scope and sequence that you might want to deliver to your teachers. But after you've planned through your training content, you'll want to train your facilitators and verify that they're really ready to execute this training well. And then you'll want to actually execute the training and ensure that your coaches and school leaders have the skills that they need to follow up with the training. So as you're training, having some type of experience where people are able to apply that knowledge real time, practice it and rehearse it to give you a sense of their real readiness to apply the skills real time with students. And then I think it's really important that I reiterate this idea of continuous improvement, because throughout the school year, You should be monitoring whether students are mastering grade level content and whether your teachers and leaders are executing on your strategy. We have a detailed how you might monitor students' access to the Opportunity Myth 4 resources in our student experience toolkit on our website. It is free of access, everybody can have it. And we've included a link for it in our handouts, or we'll be including a link for it in our handouts should you be interested in having that. So in the last few minutes, if you just want to take 5 to jot down any questions that you have and next steps that you want to take, and be prepared to share at least one question, and we will then see if we can answer them as quickly as possible.
As a heads up, I do think I added a section on this for the Padlet too, if you'd like to put things there. But if there are questions at this point, we are at the end of our new content. So if you have questions at this point that you'd like us to try to answer, please do throw them into the chat and we will do our best. Thank you for sharing, Ashley. That seems like a great first place to, it was like a great next step. And like I said, we are at the end of the new content. So if you guys, we're going to plan to stay on the line for the next couple of minutes to make sure to get all of your answers or all of your questions answered. But if you do not have any questions that you'd like to talk to us about, do share your reflections in the Padlet just so that everybody can see each other's thinking. But otherwise, thank you all so very much, again, not only for being here this afternoon, but also for all the work that you guys are doing right now on behalf of students and families. It is an impossible time and you guys are all doing a great job. So thank you all so much. We really do value you so much and we appreciate your hard work.